Being at the U of A means being part of a community. So mask up, get tested now, and protect your family and friends. Let's make sure we keep Grandma safe at Thanksgiving. Show everyone we are Razorbacks strong. Razorbacks together. Go Hogs.